guys, it's Lindsay. Welcome back to The Wandering Reader. Today I'm going to be doing my August wrap up, and in August I read a total of 14 books, which I am super happy with. So we're going to talk about all of the books that I read and what I thought of them. Let's jump in. So the first book that I read in August was Ripped by Sarah Morgan. This is the first book in the Miller Sisters duology, and this followed a woman called Hayley. And right at the beginning of the book there's this very funny scene where she is bridesmaid at this wedding, which turns out to be the wedding of her ex-boyfriend. And that she has a massive wardrobe malfunction, so her dress rips, and I think it's because she's too small for the dress from what I can remember, and she ends up displaying her chest to the entire church. And then the best man is called Niccolo, I think that's how you pronounce that, or Niccolo, I don't know. Anyway, he sort of rescues her, as it were. He kind of drags her out of the church, sort of covers her, that sort of idea, so that nobody can see her chest on display, and then kind of drags her into this room. The two of them have this little moment in the back room. They end up kissing. Hayley's quite shocked by this because the groom, whose name I can't remember, she was obviously going out with him for quite a while, and Niccolo was his best friend, and he always kept himself at quite a distance, and she believed that he didn't really like her that much. So it's quite surprising to her that he rescues her like this, and that they've had this little moment, and it goes on from there. It's quite a short book. I believe these were like Cosmo hot reads, which for those of you that don't know, Cosmopolitan is a magazine in the UK that's aimed at, I would say, like people in their early 20s, maybe like late teens, early 20s, and they clearly released books back in the day. So this and the book afterwards was released by them. And like I said, called Cosmo Hot Reads. So they're quite short, they're like novella length. How many pages was this? Yes, this was only 95 pages. I read it on my Kindle. Really, really short, and I was a bit apprehensive about it because of the fact that it was so short, and can you know, write a romance in that length, in that few pages, but I really do feel like Sarah Morgan made it believable. It was really, really hot, so Cosmo Hot Read was definitely the right name for it. So there's lots of good sex in this, definitely. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, I gave it 3.5 stars in the end. Next up I read The Hostage by Susan Wiggs. And this is the first book in the Great Chicago Fire trilogy. This was a recommendation from Sarah over at Steeped in Books. She's been reading this trilogy and really enjoying it. So this is a historical romance novel, and it follows our heroine, who is Deborah. And Deborah is her father's only child, so the sort of upbringing that she's had has meant that he's been preparing her to marry some really rich person. He wasn't born into money, her father. He accrued money for himself, and therefore society doesn't accept him, or rich society I should say, doesn't accept him in the way that he would like. You know, it's that whole kind of like Titanic thing, you know, or that's just new money sort of thing, like looking down your nose at new money, like that kind of idea. And he thinks the only way that he'll be accepted by that society is for Deborah to marry somebody from that kind of side. So he'll finally get what he wants. The lighting has changed because the sun's gone behind a cloud. So she's engaged to some really rich, well-to-do guy, and she clearly doesn't want to marry him at the beginning of the book, and she goes to see her father to kind of tell him what she thinks, which is a big thing for her because she's not really spoken her true opinion to her father before. And meanwhile, a fire has broken out in the city, and it becomes worse and worse. You know, she can't get back to where she was staying before, so she decides to stay at her father's overnight. And then the fire really rages and they have to get out of the house, and they are accosted by somebody called Tom, who turns out to be called Tom Silver, who goes to shoot her father. And there are various different reasons for that, which I won't get into because it's spoilers. And he ends up kidnapping Deborah and taking her back to the island that he lives on. And it's sort of like this close quarters, enemies to lovers type romance. It took me a while to get into this one, but by the end of the book I really, really enjoyed it. So for quite a while I wasn't expecting it to have any explicit sex scenes, and it did have some explicit sex scenes in there later on. But I really like the way that Susan Wiggs weaved the story together. The characters were really believable. They had really rich backgrounds, and yeah, I just really liked the imagination behind it. So I have now got books 2 and 3 on my Kindle ready to go. I'm looking forward to reading those. And in the end I gave that one 4.5 stars. Next up I read Burned, which is the second book in the Miller Sisters duology by Sarah Morgan. And this follows Hayley's sister Rosie. And Rosie works in a gym. She is like I think a martial arts sort of instructor, and she knows somebody has taken over the gym. They've bought it out, and it turns out to be her ex-boyfriend called Hunter. I think she was with him sort of like at least 5 years ago, and it all ended pretty badly, and he ends up being her new boss basically. And you know, she finds it really hard to handle that kind of idea because she feels like, you know, he broke her heart all of those years ago, that kind of thing. And then the story goes from there. I really liked this one as well, just as hot as the first book. And like I said, some really good sex scenes in this one as well. But I really like the relationship between the two of them, and the way Sarah Morgan is able to build that sexual tension and that relationship tension between two people so quickly. Again, this was a similar length to Ripped. Really, really enjoyed it again, and I gave this one 3.5 stars also. Yet another Sarah Morgan book that I read in August was Gift of a Family, which is the second book in the Cornish Consultants series. I think I read the first book in July. This book follows Josh, who is the brother of the guy from the first book, whose name I can't remember. And he's known as somebody who is only after, you know, a bit of fun in relationships, isn't interested in settling down, you know, doesn't want any responsibility, that kind of idea. And then there's a cottage next door to his, and a woman called Kat moves in, and he sees her for the first time on the beach when there is somebody who collapses. I can't quite remember what happens. And sort of he sees her for the first time. She turns out to be a nurse, so she treats this man and really knows what she's talking about, and he finds that quite hot, I suppose. And then she disappears off of the beach, and then turns up at the hospital the next day where he works. He's also a doctor, like his brother was a doctor in the first book, and the story goes from there. And this one featured, Kat has a son that she's brought down from London. I think they lived before, to start kind of a new life together, and it's sort of Josh negotiating his feelings about responsibility and, you know, long-term relationships and that kind of thing. Again, I really liked this one. I think I gave this 3 stars in the end. I think I gave the other one 3 stars as well. These are some of Sarah Morgan's earlier books. And you can see her writing getting better as you go along, but not quite reaching the heights of like the Puffin Island trilogy that I really liked and things like that yet, but still enjoyable. 3 stars. Yet another Sarah Morgan that I read in August was A Night of No Return, which is book number 1 in the Private Lives of Public Playboys series. This book, I'm just looking at who the characters are because I forget names all of the time. So this book follows Lucas and Emma, and Emma works for Lucas. She's like his personal assistant in this sort of like architecture business that he runs. And one night he drives out to a property that he has in the middle of nowhere in the countryside, and he leaves some paperwork behind in the office that he's taking with him the next day on some big trip that he's going on. You know, that he's helped to build this new hotel in a country that I think doesn't exist but exists in the book. And so, but it's snowing. You know, Emma just wants to get home, but she decides that she's going to drive out to his house and drop off this paperwork. When she gets there and knocks on the door, he isn't answering, but she knows he's there, and so she lets herself in. The door happens to be open, which doesn't happen in the UK unless you're like living in the 1950s again. People just don't leave their front doors open. But anyway, the front door is open, so she lets herself in, and he sort of like locked himself away in this sort of like turret room at the top of this, what appears to be sort of like this stately sort of like castle home that he owns. And when she shows up and sort of like knocks on this door of his room, he's really annoyed that she's there, and like he's brooding and there's something clearly wrong, and he's been drinking and that kind of idea. So she drops off the paperwork, but then she decides to stay to kind of get him to talk to her about what's wrong, and because she's never seen him in this kind of state before. And then the story kind of goes from there. This was all right. Yeah, I quite like this one. I don't really remember a lot of the details from it. They fly to this country eventually, which was quite nice, looking at the hotel and the way it had been built and things like that. And I quite liked the development of Lucas's character in terms of he'd had something bad happen in his past, and then there were these things during the book that sort of happened, or or happened, and to kind of try to help him to overcome that, which I quite liked. But I think I found the romance quite quick in this one, that there was this moment in the book where, oh, we've decided, and it was like a deciding really quickly sort of thing. I don't know, that's kind of like a trope of romance novels, isn't it? But I found it less believable in this one anyway, so I ended up giving this one 2.5 stars. Next up, for something totally different, I read Tilly and the Book Wanderers, the first book in the Pages & Co series by Anna James. This is a children's book, a middle grade novel, which follows Tilly, who lives with her grandparents in a bookshop called Pages & Co. And one day, characters start showing up from books that she's read, like Alice from Alice in Wonderland and Anne from Anne of Green Gables, and they start talking to her, and she's kind of like, what's going on? How can I see you and nobody else can see you? That kind of idea. And then they end up taking her into their books so she can experience going into these worlds. And we very quickly learn that she is what's called a book wanderer. And there are various different people who can do this, all of which are known by this particular society. And it's about her adventures in this world. And there is a thread to this particular story, which I won't go into because I think it spoils the story. This was utterly delightful, really, really lovely. It's been quite a while since I've read a children's novel in general, and so maybe I enjoyed it a lot for that reason, but I think because it was so much to do with reading and bookshops and libraries and characters and getting caught up in stories and things like that, I think just that whole premise is just so magical, and it was lovely. It was really lovely. I mean, this is such a beautiful book anyway. I posted a picture of this on my Instagram with the sort of naked hardcover. It's just such a lovely book. and there are various different illustrations throughout, so a little stack of books there, and there we go, we've got some of the Tea Party paraphernalia there from Alice. And there are different ways that the words are laid out, so you can see here that they're all sort of like diagonal and not normal, not sort of like set straight, as it were, and it's quite whimsical for that reason as well. Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it. The second book of this, I think, is coming out later on this year. I can't remember the title of it, but if I remember to while I'm editing, I'll put it on the screen, or a picture of what the book's going to look like. But I would highly recommend this. I absolutely loved it, and I gave it 5 stars. Next up, I read On the Come Up by Angie Thomas. I started this for the reading rush that was at the end of July, and left it behind when I went on holiday. No, I didn't actually. No, I took it with me, but I was obsessed with reading on my Kindle on holiday, mainly because it was convenient for taking around the parks and things like that, but also because it had a lot of my summer romance book bingo books on there, and it was convenient for that reason as well. So I didn't end up reading any of this while I was away, and I finished it when I got back, just before Thrillerathon started. I've got like a weekend reading vlog on my channel where I talked a little bit in more detail about my thoughts on this. But ultimately this tells the story of Brie, who's 16, and she wants to be a rap star, and her father was a rap star, but he died when she was younger, and she lives in the Garden, which is the same place that the book not on the come up, The Hate You Give takes place. So it's the same area, and there are a couple of references to what happened in The Hate You Give in the book, which I thought was quite a nice little touch. And her family life isn't particularly great. Her mum is not made redundant, but she's, yeah, I suppose made redundant, but not in the same way where you get a big payout. She's kind of let go from her job. They don't have an awful lot of money. You know, her upbringing has not been great because her dad died, and because her mum then very quickly became addicted to drugs, and she was brought up a little bit by her grandparents, and then she went back to her mum again. So sometimes her relationship with her mum is a little bit fraught, and yeah, and this, you know, then there's what goes on at school and things like that, and yeah. I really liked this, I really did. I thought it had a lot of really important things to say about poverty, again about the area that she lives in, about that particular area of America, and people's attitudes and things like that. I loved the rap lyrics in here, and I believe that Angie Thomas wanted to be a rap star at some point when she was younger, so therefore the lyrics that are in here, I suppose, are more believable for that reason. But yeah, it was clever. There was something about it that I didn't like quite as much as the first book, so I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. I still can't put my finger on what that is. Maybe I just didn't feel quite as engaged as I did with her first book, but still really, really good. Would definitely recommend it. 4.5 stars. Next up, I read Hot in Hellcat Canyon by Julie Ann Long, which is the first book in the Hellcat Canyon series, I think. And this follows our hero, who is called John Tennessee McCord, and he is a film and TV star who comes to Hellcat Canyon because he has a TV series that's being filmed there in the next few weeks, so he decides to come there early. He's just broken up with his girlfriend, who is a big celebrity actress, and he feels like her career is going places, his isn't. You know, she turns out to be a massive bitch anyway, but he comes there to kind of get away from things, to figure out, you know, what Hellcat Canyon is like, that sort of thing. And he, on his first day there, he goes into this pub, I can't remember the name of it, and orders food in there and meets Brit, and Brit is a waitress at this bar, and you know, is quite intrigued by her, that kind of idea. They meet again the next day when he decides that he can't stay in the one and only hotel in the area, which is run by some really strange lady who likes lots of cats, I think, and angels, and her whole hotel is pretty pink and kitsch, and yeah, he just can't stand that. And there's a couple next door who are on honeymoon, and you can just hear them through the wall basically. So he decides that he might rent a house or buy a house, and Brit is there to show him around this house. One of her other jobs is like working for this local property establishment, and the story goes from there. This took me a while to finish. I started it when I was in Florida, I think 5 days before we came home, and I only finished it towards the end of the month. Yeah, it took me a while to get into it, and I don't really know why. I think I was stuck on about 20% for about 2 or 3 weeks, maybe because I was distracted by other things. But this turned out to be really, really good. I liked the commentary in here on fame and getting older and not necessarily getting all of those parts that you want anymore. And you know, like, Brit was like a normal person, you know, your average Joe blogs, and what it's like to be with somebody like that, you know, the complications that come along with it and that kind of idea. And then you've also got the trope in here of he's never told a woman he loves her before, you know, he doesn't do love sort of thing. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one in the end. Loved Julianne Long's writing. I'm really interested in picking up more by her, and in the end I gave this one 4.5 stars. Okay, then the one and only book that I ended up reading for the Thriller-a-thon was The Killing Type by Jane Corrie, which on the Kindle it said it was 50 pages, but actually half of that is like a little excerpt from one of her other books, so it was like 25 pages. And so it fit the category on the bingo card for the shortest thriller on your TBR, and it certainly was the shortest thriller. And the only thing I'm going to say is that this follows two sisters who, one of them is married. And that's really all I'm going to say, because otherwise it would be a massive spoiler. Wasn't sure what to make of this because it was so short, but actually I do think Jane Corrie managed to get my attention and build up some tension, and there was a nice little twist in there that I didn't see coming, but maybe because I don't read an awful lot of thrillers. Yeah, I quite liked it. I think I gave it 3 stars in the end. Again, could have done with a lot more development, but I think actually she did a pretty good job in the number of pages that she had. I'm not really sure why this was written, like whether it appeared in some sort of magazine or whatever, I don't really know, but yeah, it was quite enjoyable, and yeah, I think I gave it 3 stars. Then I read another very short story, I should say. It's called A New York Christmas Fairy Tale, again by Sarah Morgan. This is the book 3.5 in the From Manhattan with Love series. And I'd seen this on Goodreads come up. Whenever I searched it on Amazon, it didn't come up as an option to buy it on the Kindle or anything like that. And then when I did a bit more investigating, it turns out to be a short story that you can read on the Harlequin website if you sign up, sort of thing. So I did, because I hadn't read it and it completed the series basically. And this tells the story of Roxy and James. Roxy is a single mum. She's trying really hard to be the best mum she can for her little girl, and she lives in on one of the floors of the house that Matt owns, and Matt is a character I think from book 2, and James works for Matt's landscaping business, as does Roxy, and that's how the two of them met. And it is about the relationship between the two of them. I quite enjoyed this. I'm in two minds. I've got it as 3 stars on here, but I thought it was just far too quick, and there wasn't enough development, and you know, paragraphs seemed quite staccato because there just wasn't enough substance to them. So on reflection, I'm probably going to lower my rating to like 2.5 stars or something like that, because I wanted more from it. I wanted it to be a full-length novel, but you know, you get what you get. It is what it is. I read it. It's done. That series is now complete. The next book that I read was The Governess Affair, is by Courtney Milan, and it's book 0.5 in the Brothers Sinister series. I was inspired to read this because I've started listening to the podcast The Wicked Wallflowers Club, which is a romance romance reading podcast, and each episode they interview a different author. There are a couple of episodes where they've done other things as well. And so I started listening from the beginning, and there are like 97 episodes, and I think at the moment I'm on like episode 20, somewhere around that. So I've got quite a few to listen to catch up, but I'm really, really enjoying it. So, you know, if you're after a podcast that's romance orientated, I would really, really recommend it. And they interviewed Courtney Milan in one of these episodes, and I realised after I'd listened to it and had looked up some of her books that I had one of her books on my Kindle TBR already, and is a novella, so it was short and a good way of trying out her writing. And this tells a story of, again, I forget character names, Serena, yeah, and then what's the wolf's name? Yeah, Hugo. Okay, so it tells the story of Serena and Hugo. Serena is was a governess, and she turns up outside this duke's door and refuses to leave until he gives in to her demand, sort of thing. It turns out that she's pregnant with his baby. But obviously the Duke is married, and so he sends his kind of like, he's an assistant, an advisor, that sort of idea, Hugo, to deal with her basically. And you can tell she's a really fiery character because she sits, or fiery, stubborn I think is the more the accurate word. She sits outside this Duke's house on a bench and will not leave until something is done, basically. She wants protection for her baby, all of that kind of stuff. And Hugo is obviously determined to get rid of her, because the more she sits there, the more people will think, well, who is she and what's she got to do with the Duke and that kind of thing. This is a historical romance novel, I didn't say that. And so he's sort of trying to deal with her, as it were. She's really digging her heels in, won't give up on her demands, sort of thing. And there's a bit of a spark between them at the beginning, but Hugo decides that the way that he's going to deal with it, I'm not going to say that actually, I'm not going to say that. There's this little spark between them and the story goes from there. This was utterly delightful. I really liked the writing in this one. If you didn't know that this was a romance novel and you just read a random paragraph from it, you would think that you were reading a historical fiction novel, a literary fiction novel with a historical edge to it, because Courtney Milan's writing was just so good. Her descriptions were so eloquent, she used such interesting vocabulary, and yeah, it was just so good. I really, really enjoyed it. She's the kind of, if you wanted to write a romance novel and there are all of these opinions about romance novels, aren't there, to do with, they're just trash and they're poorly written and all of those kinds of things. If you wanted to write a romance novel, you need to aspire to be writing like Courtney Milan is, because she knows how to write romance. She really does. Really, really liked it. It was a novella, but it didn't feel like it was overly short or anything like that. I think in the end, what did I give that? I ended up giving it 4 stars, which is quite a high rating for a novella and the length of it. So yeah, loved it. Can't wait to read other stuff by her. Then I finished this series, The Private Lives of Public Playboys, by reading books 2 and 3. They're both by Sarah Morgan. Book 2 was called Woman in a Chic's World and followed a woman called Avery, and the kind of sultan of that country that I mentioned earlier on. It was called Zubrin, and the two of them had a relationship in time gone past, and they broke up, and Avery, you know, it's taken her a long time to get over him, and even, you can tell at the beginning of it she's not over him. Anyway, she puts on this really brave face because he, almost as soon as he broke up with her, he got engaged to some other girl and asked her to plan the party after his wedding. And you know, to kind of prove to him that she's over him, she said yes, because, you know, if I say no, he'll know that I can't stop thinking about him, sort of thing. Whereas if I say yes, he'll think I'm over him, sort of thing, and I don't really care anymore. And it's about their relationship. And again, I really liked the sexual tension in this one. I thought I was starting to get more of classic Sarah Morgan style with that. Yeah, it was interesting. Oh, the sun's just gone behind a massive cloud again and it's gone really dark. It was really interesting reading about how the two of them were getting together again and working through their problems and things like that. There were some frustrating moments where I felt like they weren't communicating as well as they could do. But I suppose that's like the conflict in romance, isn't it? Sometimes, you know, miscommunication, or, you know, refusing to get words out of your mouth and actually talk to the other person. But it was good nonetheless. I ended up giving that one 3.25 stars. And then the third book in the series is the one that I liked the most, I think. It's called Lost to the Desert Warrior. And for quite a while I was kind of struggling to work out how it was connected to the other two, but eventually it does tell you that. And it tells a story of Layla, who's the princess of a realm called Taxan. And then you've got, at the beginning of the book, she's with her, hiding behind a curtain with her sister. And their father has just passed away. And they're overhearing a conversation where you know, in order to retain the power that they ousted off of somebody else, you know, so many years ago, his cousin is going to marry her, and he's really horrible, her father was really horrible, they don't want this to happen. So I'm just going to change the lighting a little bit, because otherwise I'm going to be like really dark in here. Let's just try, that's the wrong way, that's a little bit better. So she decides to run away with her sister and go to this guy called Raz, who should be the true heir of this area that her father ousted off of his family. And, you know, the one way that they're going to stop her, I think it's her cousin or is it her uncle, like something like that, from marrying her is for the two of them to get married. This was a lot better in the series, I think, because it dealt with the whole idea of not knowing each other. She was quite innocent at the beginning and seemed really, really young, and it was hard to kind of get a gauge on what her age was. So you've got that going on, but it almost had like it was almost like a little bit of romantic suspense, but it's not in that category. I think it's modern, from the modern Mills and Boon line. But like, yeah, like the whole like what's going to happen with the area now that her father's dead, now that she's married him, that kind of idea. Like her sister goes missing at the beginning of the book. Yeah, and I thought it was really good for that reason. This was the best one in the series, I thought, and I gave it 3.5 stars. And then the last book that I read in August was Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata, and this is translated from the Japanese by Ginny Tapley Takamori. It's a very short book. It's one that has been around on BookTube over the last, I would say, maybe 6 months or so. I first saw, I think, Doris from All the Books talk about it. I think she kind of hauled it. I think it might have been her, I could be wrong. Anyway, this tells the story of a woman called Kiko who works in a convenience store, and she's not normal, although I put normal in inverted commas because who is normal, but she's got a very specific way of thinking and ordering her life, and she works in this convenience store and everything is in a particular routine for her, but she struggles socially, so she copies a lot of what other people say and do around her. So she mimics a lot of their speech patterns, and you know, there's this one woman where she copies what brands of clothes that she wears, because she's unsure how she should speak, how she should dress, how she should act in society, and these people kind of help her to do it unknowingly. And that's really all I'm going to say because it's quite short. This isn't really about what happens, although there is a storyline to it. This is more about her character and the commentary on being a person or life, or you know, the way that we all do things, like that kind of idea. There's more of that in here than anything else, and there were lots of things in here where I really thought that Murata just told the truth. She told the reality of the world, and it was fascinating. Another book where I think I'd appreciate it more and more and more, and I'd get more out of it the more I read it, and remember more of the stuff that she was talking about the more I read it. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I didn't think I was going to enjoy it as much as I did. Don't really know why. I gave it 4.5 stars, so I would really recommend it. Yeah, I think it's a nice character-driven book, and I think it's a nice commentary on the way that we are. Yeah, I can't really put it into any other words than that. But yeah, I would definitely recommend it. So there you go, guys. They are all of the books that I read in August. I had a really good reading month. Of course, I was off from work, so that's why I had a really good reading month. I'm sure it's going to slow down a little bit now that we're in September, and I went back to work last week, which, yeah, it's definitely going to slow down, but whatever, it is what it is. So I'd love to have a chat with you in the comments below. Have you read any of these books? What did you think of them? And what was your favourite book that you read in August? Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.